Daern, Chapter 2, Flashpoint, Part 3, Cusack. So it's like I was saying before. It's crucial that I learn as much as I can about psionics, Revo concluded. Cusack had just been starting to wonder if Velos did not have to breathe as much as normal people. Cusack stared blankly into Revo's shaggy face. Even though he had been talking almost non-stop all evening, Cusack hadn't absorbed a single thing he had said. It had not been a pleasant day. Revo's face split into an intimidating approximation of a smile, and he wagged his tail. Clearly he was expecting some kind of reply. So you want to study psionics? Cusack asked. Revo nodded enthusiastically. Yes, so you'll do it? Cusack rubbed his temples. He shouldn't have said anything. He felt as though he was trying to continue a conversation started by someone else. Do what? Revo's ears flattened against his head, and his lip curled above one long canine. It was the first sign of aggression he'd seen from the Velos. At this point, he was more annoyed than intimidated, though. He had spent most of his morning doing his best to comfort the daughter of the dead man whose memory tablet had been entrusted to him. Considering the dirty looks the woman's husband had thrown him, when the volume of the woman's crying had increased exponentially, he didn't think he'd done a very good job. When he had finally managed to slip away to Olga's place, he had wanted nothing more than to have some dinner and a pint of beer. He hadn't even gotten a chance to taste his soup, however, when the Velos reappeared and launched into what could best be described as an interrogation. Why am I even speaking with him? Teach me psionics, of course. That's what I've been saying, Revo whined. Cusack choked on his beer and pounded his chest until his airway cleared. Who in the bloody mist does he think he is? Cusack had way better things to do than teach some backwood Velos anything. Cusack decided that this conversation had gone on quite long enough. Now wait just a minute. I will gladly give you directions to the Brynholm Monastery. But I can tell you right now that psionics is not something you can just learn. You have to be born with the ability. But Revo began in a whisper. More beer, sirs? Asked Olga's daughter, proffering a full pitcher. Cusack held out his tankard and nodded his thanks. He noticed that two young men had entered the bar. What did you say? Cusack asked Revo as he picked up his bowl and slurped up a mouthful of soup. He was pleased to see that Revo had become distracted by the two newcomers. Cusack relished the silence. With any luck, he would soon never see or speak to the crazy Velos again. When Rogenwald arrived, he would be on his way. He'd written the Juma merchant last fall, and he still had his reply folded in his bag in case the old man forgot his promise. He had agreed to hire Cusack as a guard when next he came in early summer. The job was his ticket out of here, and would provide money to fund his journey to La Cherno. Do you know either of those two? Revo asked. One of the men had already finished his drink and left. The second was nursing a small tumbler of Juma. Cusack glanced up as the bat-wing doors of the tavern swung shut behind the first man. I do not know. Probably field hands. The farmers sometimes hire extra help this time of year. Oh, Revo absentmindedly picked up his bowl of broth. They both ate in silence for several minutes, the quiet only broken by their slurps. The second man at the bar finished his drink and stood up. He must not have been used to Juma. He hesitated and began wandering toward the kitchen door before finally turning and heading out the proper exit. Cusack's suspicions were confirmed shortly after when he heard a drunken voice calling loudly outside. Lightweight. Cusack took a swig of beer and sighed. Gods, I hope Rogenwald shows up soon. Arrgh! A loud yell of pain came from the street. Cusack was on his feet in an instant, his mug of beer spilling over the table. Revo was already halfway to the door. Cusack looked at the knot of women that were at another table. Malata, the herb woman, had wrapped her arms protectively around one of the others. A bell began to clang. Cusack snatched up his sword from where he had leaned it against a wall and darted out the door. He nearly ran over Revo, who had stopped in the middle of the street, apparently too scared or too shocked to move. I knew it. I knew there was something wrong, Revo muttered. Cusack had no idea what he was going on about. He was too busy trying to take in the scene by the gate. The two men from the bar were fighting. The taller of the two, the drunk, was weaving badly and barely avoiding having his face carved off by the other. The attacker was swearing and half blind, with uncontrollable rage as he swung his knife wildly. How much did they drink? The attacker surged forward as the other stumbled against a torch that stood by the gate. The torch fell to the ground, sparking up a small fire. Cusack drew his longsword, tossing the scabbard aside. He wasn't sure what he was going to do, but he certainly wasn't going to let a couple of drunks kill each other in the middle of town. The taller man was on the ground now, trying to crawl away. "Hey, stop! Stop!" he called. It was too late for that, though. The attacker slumped to the ground. Cusack stared at Thorin with shock. The miller and part-time gate guard was standing atop the lookout platform, hands frozen on his bow. Cusack doubted he had ever done much more than hunt with it. To his credit, Thorin recovered quickly, sliding down the ladder and screaming for the herb woman as Cusack ran over. The fire was already greedily swarming up the side of the palisade, leaping from one log to the next. Cusack coughed and ducked his head, his throat already feeling raw from the smoke. He tugged on Thorin's arm as the guard leaned over the man who'd been attacked. Blood was already pooling around him from a deep wound in his side. "Come on, he is probably dead!" Cusack screamed, shaking Thorin's arm. The flames reflected in the crimson pool. Even in the warm glow of the light, Thorin appeared as pale as stone. Cusack slapped his burly shoulders, desperate to get the man moving. A log exploded over them, shattering their backs in 1,000 sparks. Cusack hissed in pain as clinging debris burned through his clothes, searing the flesh beneath. Thorin snapped out of it and dragged the tall man away from the burning wall. The heat pressed against Cusack's skin. "Where's Malata?" Thorin yelled once they were clear of the blaze. He gently laid the wounded man back on the ground. "She was at Olga." A horse careened past them, trumpeting in terror. Tongues of fire flew behind it, and the stench of burnt hair overcame all else as it ran. Fueled no doubt by the hay and mounds of manure, the stable had flared up like a torch. Dark figures ran around it. Cusack blanched as one of the figures screamed and writhed, batting frantically at her clothes. It was the women from the bar. "Just cut 'em loose!" a scratchy voice commanded. The ground shook as 5 more horses galloped out of the stable, trailing their leads. It was not a moment too soon. As the last woman dove from the burning building, the roof collapsed. Embers flew out into the air, where they hung like bright orange snow. "Gods above," Thorin muttered helplessly. Cusack shook himself and surged forward to help the women. "Wait, Cusack! He said there's something—" Cusack ignored him and slid to a stop beside the group of women. They were crowded around Malata. She was coughing worse than usual and steadying herself against one of the empty market stalls. Despite their harrowing rescue of the horses, none of the women seemed badly hurt. Revo was among them as well. The edge of his mane was smoking and sizzling. They were all now standing around wide-eyed, dismayed by the inferno. Cusack set his sword against the market stall and put a hand on Malata's back. "Are you all right?" Without waiting for an answer, he turned to the others. "We need to put out the fire now, before it spreads. Buckets. Do we have buckets?" "I got a few in the back, but it won't be enough," said Olga, her face a mask of soot and ash. "Get them, and send someone around. We need as many hands as we can get," Cusack said. Olga and her daughter ran back to the bar. The Malata straightened, breathing easier now. She looked at one of the younger women, who wasn't singed like the rest. "Ina, go around the village. Knock on every door and then stay out of the way," Malata barked. "I want to help," Ina protested. But Malata would hear none of it. "No, not in your condition," she said, glancing at the young woman's swollen belly. "Now go." Without further argument, the woman headed off into the village. Her job was made easier by the fact that several people were already awake and running towards them. Nearly all were women, wearing little more than their thin chemises, but all looked fierce and determined. They wouldn't let their town burn down while their husbands, brothers, and sons were away for the harvest. Sven Hansen arrived as well. He squeezed a handcart through an alley on the other side of the market square. He seemed to have loaded every bucket he had ever made onto the cart. Cusack waved his arms and shouted, unknowingly mimicking Albert during the first drink. It was hard to believe that only last night the entire town had celebrated the beginning of the harvest, and now, how many widowers will be made tonight? Cusack organized a ragged line from the crumbling stable to the nearest well, and the first buckets of water were swallowed by the fire, belching steam and smoke into the night sky. Children were sent scurrying away with buckets in hand, and the whole town was filled with the sounds of splashing water as the children soaked the thatched roofs of the houses to keep the fire from catching. A section of the palisade finally collapsed, opening a yawning hole into the night. The alarm bell gave one final doleful clang as the watchtower fell. It was to be its final warning. Revo was the first to hear it coming. Through all the chaos of the night, it came like a sound of rolling thunder. The Velo stopped and looked toward the hole in the wall, and then lifted his nose to the sky and released a long, haunting howl. Cusack thought he could almost hear words mixed in with the eerie sound, but they were lost to the sky. Everyone stopped for a moment and turned as one to stare into the darkness. For one heart-lifting second, Cusack thought it might be the men from the farms. They must have seen the flames and ridden to their aid. With great whoops and cries, strangers thundered through the wall, their horses rearing and snorting as they pounded through the ashes. They wielded crude weapons and torches, waving them above their heads so that their light stretched like flaming lassos. "Run!" Cusack yelled, his voice cracking as the first man, a giant brute with a long leather coat, threw his torch towards the bar. Cusack hissed, his face swelling with rage as he locked eyes with the man. The women fled in every direction. Cusack's mind seethed as he opened himself to the disgusting thoughts of the intruders. They filled him, yammering and howling like a pack of rabid dogs. The civility had left them entirely, gone in a frenzy. What remained was nothing more than an oily soup of petty lusts, a lust for money, for glory, for sex. Cusack had become a lone island in a sea of crashing thoughts, each wave threatening to drag him down. He retrieved his sword from the market stall and charged towards the leader. "He is aiming for your head. That one will swing from the left. Careful, that one has a bow." Filled as he was with their thoughts, nothing could touch him. He slipped between them all like a fish through water. "Looky here," the leader called madly, grinning with a mouthful of blackened teeth. "We got ourselves a hero." Cusack dove amongst the legs of the man's horse, hamstringing the animal with a rapid cut. He jumped clear as the horse stumbled to the ground, bellowing. The man screeched as his legs snapped beneath 1,000 pounds of horseflesh. His pain was short-lived, however, as Cusack's sword laid open his throat. The bandits hacked and slashed wildly. They were clearly unused to fighting on horseback, and hadn't expected to run into anyone with Cusack's skill and training. Their attacks were predictable, their movements slow and sloppy compared to his. He flowed from one stance to another, his mind perfectly in balance with his motions. The torrent of foreign thoughts beat against his will, but he centered himself as he had been taught, becoming an unmoving stone in the stream. The bandit screamed for his blood even as Cusack dropped a second man. As the smell of blood and smoke mixed, the horses panicked. They unseated riders left and right as they fought to escape the hellish scene. The bandits regrouped on foot and came at Cusack all at once, swarming him like a horde of ants. Cusack cursed as a sword slipped by his guard, cutting the meat of his arm. His connection with their thoughts blinked out of existence, like a snuffed candle. Then he took another wound to the hip. "There are too many." A third man charged him with a notched spear, a savage smile twisting his features. This is it. A presence filled his mental space, rushing past him with all the force of a charging bull. It was unlike anything he had ever felt before. The presence collided with the mind of the spear-bearer. His face went slack and he toppled to the ground. Cusack thought he might have still been breathing, but the bandit was just staring blankly into the dirt. Cusack parried the clumsy blows of another attacker and cut his way free into open ground. He spun, ready to face more adversaries, but none pursued. They had become preoccupied. To his left, a bandit jerked as an arrow lodged itself in his shoulder. He spotted Thorn, who had climbed a roof and was balanced on its narrow peak. He was reloading and firing his bow in rapid succession, his hands a blur and his jaw set. Another fell to Sven, who was wielding his short-handled Cooper's with deadly precision. Cusack's gaze fell on Revo. Once more Cusack sensed a ferocious mental presence, and another bandit fell silently to the ground. This time there was no doubt about its source. "You are a scion?" Cusack yelled over the madness. Revo stared back at him for several moments before bursting out, "Of course! I told you that at Olga's. Were you even listening at all?" A bandit broke from his quarrel with Sven and ran at Revo, clearly hoping for a softer target. Cusack intercepted, slamming his shoulder into the bandit's side. The man pinwheeled off course and decided that was enough. He dropped his weapon and ran for it. Others were following his example. One had managed to recapture a horse and was fleeing into the night. Thorin aimed a shot at him, but missed. Cusack shook his head disbelievingly at Revo. How could I have missed that? Maybe if he had not hammered on and on. But this wasn't the time to ponder. Only 2 attackers remained. They stood back to back, clutching rusty swords with shaking hands. Drop your weapons now. You have lost, Cusack called as he advanced on them. Sven and Revo fell in beside him. Revo stretched to his full height, thrusting out his head and letting loose a ferocious roar that rose and fell with such menace that Cusack and Sven unconsciously backed away from him. This had a much greater effect than anything Cusack had to say. The 2 men dropped their weapons instantly. Please, don't kill us. We surrender. Please don't. It was Walt's idea. All his, one blubbered, holding up his hands. Hot tears and snot ran down his red face. Cusack had no idea who Walt was or what his idea might have been, but clearly they hadn't anticipated this kind of resistance. Cusack lowered his sword, shoulders sagging. For the first time he became fully aware of his injuries. The cut to his hip throbbed whenever he rested his weight on that side, and several nicks on his arms itched. The palisade had nearly burned itself out, but the stable still blazed, sending deadly sparks into the air. Horses seemed to be everywhere, galloping to and fro. We survived. Is it over? Sven was approaching the bandits, kicking their weapons out of reach, when a short young man with red hair came barreling through the hole in the palisade. He darted straight by them without slowing, passing so close that Cusack could see his eyes rolling madly. So great was his terror that the man couldn't even feel the pain from where his unshod feet plowed through the burning coals. He didn't even look at them as he raced by. He just yelled, his voice cracking with panic. Mulrino! Mulrino! Thanks for listening to Daern, a story in progress. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like. And if you really enjoyed it, consider donating through Patreon. Any amount will go a long way towards helping us bring more content to you. Links to our Patreon and our website are in the description. See you next week, and have a good one.